Okay, so we're going to take a look at how to go about starting to plan an experiment. The way we're going to do this is far more similar to experiment planning structure that they use in IB and A level. There's not very much investigation planning in the GCSE content. So it will take quite a few stages to get through to the planning. So to give you an idea, we have looked at this document during our lesson time. And today we want you to look at sort of steps 1 through 4. Now, obviously, the experiment you're going to be doing is limited by being in the circuit breaker. So you will need to think of chemicals that you can use that you will have inside your house. So there are some examples on the Firefly page. There are also things you can think about, like if you have food colorings and you have bleach your parents may let you work with, you could change the concentration of the bleach and time how long it takes for the color to disappear of your food coloring. You could take different types of food coloring and add the same amount of bleach and time how long it takes them to go colors each time. But you need to think carefully about what you're going to do. So the first thing you're going to have to identify is your independent variable, the thing you're deliberately going to change. You want 5 equal values for this. So if you're going to deliberately change the temperature, and say you're working with water and solubility of something you have in the flat, salt, sugar, corn flour, whatever, you need to make sure you're spreading it out evenly. So the temperatures you are doing are like 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees, 60, like nicely evenly spread, not 10, 15, 27. So you want them evenly spread out if you can, guys. And you want to try and identify these values first. We'll talk about this a little bit next lesson, but you'll need to do a little bit of preliminary experiment, trialing your method a little bit beforehand to make sure you can actually get some results. This is what we really do when we design an experiment. So all the methods you would usually do in lessons, someone's trialed them several times to check that 20 centimeters cubed of hydrogen peroxide is the right amount to use to get sensible results. So you're going to have to do a little bit of trialing. Second thing to do is make sure you have a dependent variable. What are you going to measure? Now, for most of you, this is going to be time, the time taken for this amount to dissolve, or the time taken for this amount to change color, or the time taken to fill a particular volume. So it's probably going to be time. Some of you might find that you're measuring something like mass. So let's say you were looking at how temperature affects the mass of something dissolving. You could be measuring mass as your dependent variable, but I don't suggest that, mostly because you'll be using a lot of salt or sugar, whichever you chose to use, and that might be inconvenient for your parents. Okay, guys? So you need to work out the thing you're going to measure. And then the bit everyone slips up on is the control variables, so the things you have to keep the same. Now, with rate, what is important about this is that you think of the 4 things that we normally use to change rate. So temperature, pressure, concentration, surface area. Obviously, none of you are likely to be working with catalysts, although I suppose you could buy some liver in and do a catalyst style experiment with some liver, but you would have to also get some hydrogen peroxide from the chemist, and that would be quite tricky because it's the wrong concentration. But it is doable if you wanted to do that one. But your control variables should be the other 3 that are not your independent variables. So if you are changing the temperature, you need to work out how you are controlling your concentration, your surface area, and your pressure. Pressure is easy. You're doing it at room pressure, so you don't need to worry too much about that one. If you're changing the concentration, so let's say you're deciding to do vinegar and bicarbonate of soda, so you're changing your concentration, you need to make sure you're doing it at the same temperature and you have the same surface area. So your control variables should be pretty obvious, guys. They should be the other rates things that are not, that's not the one you're deliberately changing. Then your last step is to come up with a very clear research question. Now, the important thing with your research question is that it should not generate a yes or no answer. It should generate a pattern that you can draw a graph from and show a trend. So your question shouldn't be something like, does temperature affect the rate of salt dissolving in water? 10 grams of salt dissolving in water, for example, because that is a yes or no answer. It either does or it doesn't. Usually this means the research question should start with how does. So how does changing the temperature affect the rate at which salt dissolves in water? How does the surface area of an antacid tablet affect how quickly it dissolves in vinegar? So your research question should be something you can use to describe a pattern. Okay, so as the temperature goes up, so you should have a pattern that you are describing, not a yes and no. The other thing to remember about your research question is it should contain your independent variable and your dependent variable. So let's say you are changing the temperature and measuring how long it takes a certain amount of salt to dissolve. Your question would be, how does changing the temperature, my independent variable, affect the time taken for 10 grams of salt to dissolve, my dependent variable? So your research question should be very, very clear and show me exactly what your independent variable and dependent variable are. What I'm expecting to see at the end of this, guys, at the end of this lesson, is a little table with this is my independent variable, this is my dependent variable, and these are my control variables for my experiment, and this is my research question. As usual, I am around if you have any questions, get hold of me. Have a lovely day.